Good afternoon, everybody, and good morning for those of you on the West Coast. I am Peter Ford. I'm a partner at PilieroMazza. I practice primarily in the firm's government contracting group, and I manage the firm's office in Boulder, Colorado. And much of my practice encompasses the small business rules, the small business programs such as the 8A program, Mentor-Protégé, SDVOSB, Women-Owned Small Business. So I do a lot with what we're discussing today. And then with me today is Pam Mazza. Pam is the partner or the managing partner of PilieroMazza. She oversees all day-to-day operations shaping PilieroMazza's long-term strategic planning and vision. And her practice encompasses all aspects of government contracts, including federal small business procurement programs. And she also counsels clients on general corporate matters, corporate transactions, and regulatory compliance. And it's our pleasure to have John Klein with us today as well. John is Associate General Counsel for Procurement Law at SBA. He's essentially their head lawyer dealing with all things procurement related. So John guides the SBA program folks on small business government contracting, set-aside programs such as the 8A program, the SDVOSB program, the Women-Owned Small Business program, and the Hub Zone program. And he really does much more. A lot of the regulations that you've seen over the years, John has had a major role in drafting. And in fact, he's the primary author of the final rule we will be discussing today, consolidation of Mentor-Protégé programs and other government amendments, government contract amendments.
Thanks, Peter. So just some logistics. We have 90 minutes scheduled for this. As you can see from the overview, Peter's going through the overview in a minute, but there's lots of information. I'm sure that if you have been on a webinar before, you know how to type in your questions. Oh, I see we already have questions. And Peter will direct them to John's attention or my attention going through, and we'll try to hit as many of them as we can. After the session's over, if you're not, satisfied that your question was answered and you don't get an email from us in the near future with an answer, shoot us an email again and we will make sure that we try to get it addressed. Peter, I'm sorry I jumped in.
No, that's fine. And then just lastly, we are scheduled for 90 minutes, and we do hope that you all stay with for the entire session. If we go past 90 minutes, I believe we have the flexibility to do so. Like Pam mentioned, some of you have submitted questions in advance. We'll try to get to all of them and then use the messaging system like Pam indicated. Big picture overview of what we're going to be talking about today. We'll start by discussing changes to SBA's all small Mentor-Protégé program, such as eligibility requirements. The Protégé is two mentor lifetime limit. Joint ventures, their limited durations, required security clearances. How do you account for JV receipts and employees? Small business rules generally, certification, recertification, SBA's affiliation rules. Changes to the 8A program that impact all participants. And then finally, 8A program changes that are specific to tribally owned applicants and participants. And without further ado, I will turn things over to Pam and John to get us started.
Thank you. First thing I want to do is just call people's attention to the effective date of November 16th. It's probably technically the 15th because it's 30 days after publication. If you haven't seen the rule, it's in the October 16th Federal Register. And so the whole rule is produced there. And so, when SBA writes a rule, they write it moving forward. So we have an effective date, but as you'll see it when we're going through, there might be lots of questions in terms of transitioning. How does this affect me if I'm in this stage or that stage of a procurement or the Mentor-Protégé program? So we'll try to hit as many of those as we can going through. I want to join Peter, John, in thanking you so much for giving your time today for us and to always being there to help out and to help guide the small businesses. So thank you. And I'm going to let John drive. So go ahead, John, take it away.
Thanks, Pam. So first of all, as Peter and Pam both said, the regulation was entitled the consolidation of Mentor-Protégé small business programs. Obviously, that's not all that's in it. It's a very expansive rule. It covers lots of topics as they've noted. And the reason for that is when SBA has a rule that's moving forward, there are lots of things that we have in mind that we want to get changed as well. Since we know one rule is moving, we end up putting lots of things in it too. that's what happened in this case. So there's just, as Peter said, there's things on joint ventures, the size, 8A, lots of different things that we'll talk about as we go through this rule. So as you know, the rule was published as a proposed rule last November 2019, and we had like a 91-day comment period. We received 189 comments in response to the proposed rule. You know, you may say, oh, that's not that much, but many of those comments were very, very in depth. You know, 30 pages or more, as PilieroMazza also made a 30-page comment into our regs. And of course, we took a lot of those comments into effect in the final rule. We definitely read all your comments, and so you know, don't think we don't. I mean, as you can go through the rule, you can see changes made specifically in response to comments made. So we definitely look at them, we take them into account in going forward. So again, the first thing we talked about here is the consolidation of the Mentor-Protégé programs. And as you know, the 8A Mentor-Protégé program was established in 1998. Initially, it was established as an administrative program only. We had no statutory authority for it. We thought it was a good idea to help small businesses be protégés and help them with the business development parts of the 8A program. Now, then in response to the Jobs Act 2010 and then NDAA 2013, Congress specifically authorized small business Mentor-Protégé programs for the other programs. So they said, you know, in the Jobs Act, that there should be a Mentor-Protégé program similar to that of the 8A program for WSPs, HubZone, service-able vets. And then in NDAA 13, they added and for small businesses as well. So what's interesting about that is, although SBA's 8A program doesn't have a specific statutory authority itself, it does indirectly through these other programs, because now Congress says they want one similar to that for the 8A program, which is kind of interesting, I always thought. You know, at the time we did the all small program, the 8A community was thinking that it made sense to keep the 8A program as it was, the 8A Mentor-Protégé program as it was. They were used to it, they knew it, they liked it, and they were concerned about losing some of the benefits they had, or they thought they had in the 8A program that they weren't sure would be available to them in the all small. So we kept it separate initially, but at this point in time, we think it just makes sense to move the two of them together, and that's what we're doing. You know, what do you get through a mentor-protégé relationship? You get, for the most part, you're able to form a joint venture with your mentor, and that joint venture may be considered small, regardless of the size of the mentor. So there's exclusion from affiliation from the mentor. So as long as the protégé firm is a small business, it's able the joint venture is able to be considered a small business for any contract for which the protégé is otherwise eligible. If the protégé is a WSP, you can go after WSP's contracts. If it's an 8A firm, you can go after 8A contracts. And it doesn't matter if you went through the 8A program or the all small program. If you're an 8A firm, you had the same exact benefits at the end. So it just made sense to consolidate them, eliminate any confusion that's out there, and consolidate resources as well. The one thing that some 8A firms, yes, Peter.
We're getting some questions about the transition from the 8A program to the all small, and what, if anything, do companies that are participating in the 8A Mentor-Protégé program have to do to transition to the all small, and same for their existing 8A joint ventures, or is it going to happen automatically?
So a firm that had received a Mentor-Protégé relationship through the 8A program, prior to this reg, we said you must tell us that you want to keep it for the all small. That's no longer the case. You will be transitioned automatically into the all small, and under either program, you had a total of 6 years in the program. Whatever was used up to date in the 8A side will be subtracted and be in the all small. So if you had 2 years already used in 8A, you'll have four more years left in the all small, and you'll be transitioning automatically. The one thing that some 8A firms were concerned about is they said, right now we have the ability to go to our district office and work with our BOS in creating a mentor-protégé relationship and an agreement to make sure it benefits us well. The mere fact that's going, that the 8A mentor-protégé program is going away doesn't mean that you can't talk to your BOS still. If you have problems and you want to go to your BOS with mentor-protégé issues, you certainly can do so. That's not going to be precluded under the normal course of business at SBA. So if you have a good relationship with a BOS and you want to talk to them about certain Mentor-Protégé things, should they be included, should they not be included, you certainly can still do that, and nothing's prohibiting you from doing so. The only difference is when you actually apply for the program, you'll be going online to the all small as opposed to doing it through the district office level. That's the only difference, really. So that's all I had on.
This is an effective date of November
Yes.
16th, 17th. So what happens if there is a joint venture proposal on a competitive 8A, say, that's due between now and November 16th? Does it still go to the district office, or what are you going to do about that transition?
I'll get to that one in a minute because we're not up to joint ventures yet.
Okay.
But in the other question that you could have had, I thought you were going to ask me is, what happens if my Mentor-Protégé agreement is already in the district office sitting there being processed? What's going to happen to it? And I've been told that they will continue to process it and send it forward to headquarters. And once it gets to headquarters, then it'll be automatically transitioned to the all small at that point in time. So the district office, if it's already there, will continue to process it until it gets to the headquarters, and then they'll switch it over at that point in time. But if I were you at this point in time, I probably would not submit a new one to the district office. I probably would just wait till November 16th and do it online to the all small, or do it online all small today. It doesn't make sense for you to go through 8A at this point in time. I think it just might confuse some people along the way. So that's all I would say about that.
Okay.
Okay, I'll get to joint ventures. Don't worry, I didn't forget that one. Now, some of the changes to the Mentor-Protégé program. You know, through the years, we've always heard, you know, what happens if you know, first of all, let me start over again. First of all, you remember that there's only 2 Mentor-Protégé relationships in the life of a small business. So a protege firm or firm who wants to be a protege can only have 2 mentors forever. Unfortunately, sometimes they've told us through the years that many times the relationships go bad quickly. 2 months, 3 months, 5 months, 6 months, it goes bad. And that when that happens, unfortunately, what's happened in the past is that was one of your 2. So you may have gotten only 3 or 4 or 5 months out of one relationship, and you're hoping the next one would be better. And we had an informal rule which allowed the Mentor-Protégé relationship not to count against your 2 if in fact you got no benefits out of that relationship. But that was a subjective call, and sometimes SBA and the firm didn't agree, and that caused some hard feelings. So the rule makes a hard and fast rule. If the Mentor-Protégé relationship ends within 18 months from the date it was approved, it will not count towards your 2 in your lifetime. So that's a good thing. So if I were you right now, I'm sorry, Peter, go ahead.
I was going to say, how does that work with current Mentor-Protégé agreements, and specifically, does the ability to terminate a Mentor-Protégé relationship include current Mentor-Protégé relationships that have been in effect for less than 18 months?
So if they've already been terminated, they count as one of your 2. But if you have it in place right now and it's not a great relationship, I would wait till after November 16th and then terminate it. Because after November 16th, the new rules are in effect, and now it won't count against you. If you terminate it today, unfortunately, it will count against you. So I'd wait till November 16th, and you say, and if it's less than 18 months, you can say, you know what, I can get out of this one, start a new one, and go forward and have 2 more good relationships. That's what I would do.
That's good to know.
Now, in terms of, let's see what I was going to say there. The other thing we did here is that we allowed a substitution if it goes beyond that. So in other words, if it goes past 18 months, it goes to 2 years, 3 years, and now the relationship goes bad, the rule will allow us to allow the project firm to find another firm who wants to be his mentor for the remaining portion of its term. Yeah, you know, up front we've said that the Mentor-Protégé relationship can be up to 6 years. So if you already had 3 years and then it ended, you can do a new relationship, or not really a new relationship. A new firm can substitute itself for the other old firm for the remaining 3 years in that program. So you don't really lose out on your total 6 + 6 years. This is trying to get you to have a full 2 terms of Mentor-Protégé relationships, and hopefully that'll be the case.
That seems very helpful.
I think that was a good compromise there too, as well, because again, the problem has always been people coming back repeatedly, wanting coming back over and over again. Like one of the things we said in the final rule regarding the 18-month thing is if a firm repeatedly has 17-month relationships over and over and over again, at some point SBA may say, you know what, this is not good. You're just gaming the system, and we're not going to allow you to have further. Do we think that'll happen often? I don't think so. But for those 2 or 3 bad firms who might want to think about doing that, it doesn't make sense to do so, because you really won't get the full benefits, and somewhere along the way SBA will stop you from doing it, and you won't be able to have any more full relationships, unfortunately. How much you want to go into of all this other stuff? You want to talk about all that, Pam? What do you think?
I think it's pretty self-explanatory, John, unless, Peter, you see questions from the audience on it. The one thing that was on the previous slide, though, John, you're not allowing for reconsiderations.
That's correct.
Okay. So what happens then if it's declined? Do you reapply if you still want to try?
Just reapply. And the reason things are declined is probably because the benefits aren't explained full enough for what the purchase is going to be receiving. That's the key. Again, any mentor-protege relationship, from our viewpoint, we care about the protege. Don't be talking about how the mentor is going to be benefiting from this. I'm sure that they're thinking about joint ventures, and that's probably good for them. But for you, we want to know what you, the protege, are going to be getting out of this deal, and that's the key. Explain as much as you can, and as objectively as you can, what you're going to be getting, so that everyone can understand that you are getting it. And then when we ask you about it after a year or so, did you get what you asked for, or what they promised you? It's easily shown that you did or did not get that.
And do you anticipate, well, if you know, this is a program question, but how long does it take right now for headquarters to process an application under the all small program? And do you think this merging is going to create any additional time?
I don't think it'll create additional time, only because many 80 firms have already converted. They thought it was faster, and for a while it was. At this point, they tell me that it's still within 90 days, but I don't know the exact days for at this point.
Okay. Are we ready to move on to joint ventures?
Just a few more quick ones on this. Like, for instance, in the proposed rule, we asked a question about whether or not mentors should be limited to less than $100 million in receipts. Overwhelmingly, that was the most commented on section, and almost everyone thought it was a bad idea. I included, thought it was a bad idea, but that's just me. From my perspective, all I really care about is the protege firm going to be receiving the agreed upon benefits, and are they going to be developing their business development objectives? If that's the case, I don't really care the size of mentor, and that's what the final rule end up saying.
Okay. We should probably talk about NAICS codes too, because I know that there's been some confusion about this. So I think SBA is clarifying that if you are a potential protege, that you can submit an application under your primary NAICS code if you're small, and that's the code that you want to get the assistance in. But you can also submit that application under one of your secondary codes, and that's whether you're large or small under your primary. SBA doesn't want you to submit an application to be a protege under a secondary code where you have no experience. But if you can show that you have some experience, it's a logical extension of what you're doing, then SBA will approve that. So you don't need to submit under your primary NAICS code is the point of this.
Right. I mean, there was some questions about we said in the past that you must have showed us that you've done some work in that area. And what does that mean? That had to be the exact same NAICS code, or could it be a related NAICS code? And we tried to clarify that to say, we understand that some work can be identified, in several different codes as the same exact work. And we're not going to say you can't do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 because in the past you've only done 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, even though the contracting officer easily could have identified as either one. As long as it makes sense that the contracting officer could have identified it as this or that, that'll be sufficient. In addition, as Pam just noted, even if you haven't done this exact work, as long as we believe it's to be a logical progression, and you should be able to explain that, why it is that in your application, that should be sufficient as well. And the other thing I want to talk about real quickly is about competing mentor-protege relationships. As you know, the mentor can have up to 3 relationships at any point in time. You know, they have one, and then the second and/or the third must demonstrate to us how that new relationship will not compete with the one they already have. So the question we've gotten in the past is, can the same mentor have a firm in the same exact NAICS code? Can they be in the same exact geographic area? Tell us, what are the rules on that, SBA? And so obviously, we don't mind if it's the same exact NAICS code, as long as you can demonstrate to us that they really are independent and won't be competing against each other. For instance, if you have a construction firm in California and one in New York, and the one does the all West Coast work and one does East Coast work, you talk about that in your application for the second one, there should be no problem getting in. Alternatively, if they're actually in the same exact geographic area with the same NAICS code, but they say, yes, we have the same NAICS code, but my niche is this, their niche is that. I don't ever go after contracts like that. I go after these types. If you can demonstrate that, that makes sense as well. As long as you have to just tell us why it makes sense that you're not going to be competing. And third, if you come into the program as one came in as an 8A firm and the next protege maybe a hub zone or a WSB firm, and they say, we're only going after contracts in the WSB arena, and the other firm is going after 8A and other types of contracts. So if you can demonstrate that the two relationships, two mentor-protege relationships will not be competing, that should be fine. We'll let the second one in as well. But then in that case, if there is a WSB and an 8A mentor-protege relationship, if there's a small business set-aside contract, only one of those 2 joint ventures could go after a contract. We would not allow both of those firms to submit offers on that individual contracts. If both of them did, we would disregard both firms and find them to be ineligible. Just as a out there.
So
that makes sense.
A little bit. What problem is SBA trying to solve by restricting the 2 competitors? You don't want the mentor joint venture.
We don't want them to be submitting offers on the same contract as joint ventures. I just think that there would be too much going on there. There's no way to be fair to one protege if the mentor's on both. Somewhere along the way, they'll be favoring one versus another. We don't want that to happen.
So in an application, it would be good for the mentor or the protege to say, we don't compete against them. We have no intention of,
Right.
becoming a DOD contractor. That's their space or
Exactly.
something.
Exactly. The second contractor could be the exact same business in the exact same geographic area, but they say, as you just said, they focus on DOD. I'm going after all DOE contracts, totally different, and that's my focus. If that's what you're doing, that should be okay as well. As long as you explain it fully, it should be all right.
Okay.
Okay.
Any questions on that from our group, Peter?
Yeah, we have a question, John, that I was hoping you could answer about the 3 protege limit in the context of when the mentor also has a protege who's located in Puerto Rico.
Okay. Well, in Puerto Rico, with the new statute and now in our regs, the first 2 from Puerto Rico don't count. So you can have 2 plus the 3, or a total of 5. If you have two relationships from Puerto Rico, you can have up to 5 then.
So the protege's principal office has to be in Puerto Rico, right?
That's correct. Yes. Okay, joint ventures. So the first thing this rule does is makes it so the SBA will no longer approve competitive 8A joint ventures. We will do so continuously for 8A sole source, but not for 8A competitive. In the 8A competitive arena, we allow protests. Their size protests can be allowed. So if, just like we do in a small business set-asides and any other small business program, if a competitor believes you didn't follow the joint venture rules properly, they submit a size protest. It goes to one of the SBA 6 government contracting area offices. The size specialist will look through the joint venture agreements and provisions and to see whether or not the 8A firm or the hub zone firm or the 8A or the women-owned small business firm is really in control like they should be under the regs. If they are, there's no problem. They get exclusion from affiliation and everything's fine. If they are not, unfortunately, they would be found to be other than small. So, but that process can be done outside entirely of SBA's approval in the 8A context. So in the 8A competitive, we won't approve them. The protest mechanism should police that, with competitors. On the sole source side, there's nobody else to look at these things except SBA. If we don't look at them, no one's going to know whether or not they actually are following the rules properly. So we are ensuring that in that context. Now, so in the competitive context, this is Pam's question before. The question was, when will SBA continue or stop continuing to approve joint ventures in the 8A competitive context? Remember, our rule currently says that a joint venture must be approved prior to award. So if the apparent successful offeror is identified as a joint venture prior to November 16th, SBA will approve that joint venture even if the approval occurs after November 16th. If the apparent successful offeror joint venture is identified after November 16th, we will not approve that joint venture. You can just go on this merry way. So that's.
So, John, are you saying that, for example, with respect to the STARS 3 procurement, if you joint venture submitted a bid and award is made after November 16th, SBA is not required to approve the joint venture?
That's correct.
That's good.
And in that context, a protester would, a competitor would say, I don't believe they should get award. They didn't follow the rules. But we are not going to look at those Mentor-Protégé agreements.
Now, the district offices, for those companies that have submitted the bid and have submitted their 8A joint venture packages to their district offices, is there going to be some notice back to them saying that we no longer need to have this?
I'm not sure that one. I'll talk to them about that and find out what we think. Okay. The other big change in joint. I'm sorry.
Yeah,
I know.
We talk a little bit about the changes to the 3 awards in 2 years rule.
Yep.
Straight 2 years rule.
That's what I was just going to talk about.
So, go ahead then.
No. So this stems from. SBA believes that a joint venture is something formed for a limited purpose, limited duration. Initially, it used to be 1 contract. We extended it to 3 contracts. 3 contracts over a 2-year period is what the rule source currently says. People have been saying that can we have some more flexibility here if we can go more in contracts, more years. So the compromise we made was we were allowing unlimited number of contracts over a 2-year period. We kept it 2 years because we still believe that there should be some limits on the joint venture. If 2 firms form a relationship that's ongoing indefinitely, it really is not a joint venture in our minds. It really is a new business entity and should be treated as such. So if it's going to be a joint venture, it still must be limited to 2 years, starting from the date of the first award, and the first award can be innovation, but it shouldn't be ongoing indefinitely. After 2 years, just form a new joint venture and go after more contracting opportunities. It just doesn't make sense to continue having the same one going indefinitely is in our minds. So this makes it easier, but it still has the 2-year rule as a limit. Any questions on that?
Well, the question I have, and I think a lot of us have, is, well, how does the effective date of the final rule play into this? Meaning, if you have an existing joint venture agreement right now, and let's say you're still within the 2-year time frame, but you have 3 contracts, are you going to be able to get additional contracts after November 16th for the duration?
No. If you have your 3 already, that no joint venture is over.
Well, you have to stop bidding, but if you have pending proposals within.
Oh, that's different. Of course, if you have pending proposals, they can always be awarded. If you submitted your offer prior to you having your 3rd award, of course they can still come in and be awarded those contracts. No problem with that. But if you already have 3 awards, you should not be going after new contracting opportunities with that same joint venture. Just form a new one, go after opportunities that way, and there's no problem that way.
Okay, so if a JV is maxed out now based on contract, come November 16th, they're not going to be revised, so to speak, because they have additional time left on their 2-year period.
That's correct. This is that in our mind, that joint venture is already over. So there's nothing to revive. It's done in terms of getting new awards. We're not going backwards in time and allowing this to happen.
Okay, so
Okay.
if you have that's the only question I think about the transition, right? Because if you have a joint venture that's ongoing and it only has 1 awards, the rule's still the same. So you'll have that for 2 years from the date of that first award, and then you start a new one, because you're not starting the 2-year period over based on a new effective date.
That's correct. Yeah. Okay. Next thing I'll talk about is facility clearance, security clearance officers. Is that on your next list? What's on your next?
It should be, but John, we have one final question. I think I know the answer, but if you have an IDIQ, that's come November 16th, after November 16th. If you have a joint venture that's awarded an IDIQ and that starts the 2-year clock, after that 2-year clock, can the joint venture still continue bidding on task orders issued against that IDIQ?
Yes. Because again, it goes to the contract, not to the order. Just under the 3 and 2 rule, we never said you can only get 3. We never say you can only get 3 orders. You can get 3 contracts. So
the vehicle is 1, and that's it. The task
that's correct.
Don't count.
Unless, of course, that the vehicle is a BPA or something to that effect, that's not a contract, and then each order would be a contract. Now that would be a problem going forward, of course.
Yep.
Okay.
So here's the facilities clearances.
Okay. You want to talk about this a little bit? Go ahead.
No.
Okay. This is something we've heard through the years as firms have complained that both 2 firms have the necessary facility clearances. They form a joint venture to go after a contract, and the agency says, "I'm sorry, you're not eligible. The joint venture itself doesn't have the clearance." Well, SBA believes that's a little bit crazy, because under our joint venture rules, a joint venture is limited to not having to be unpopulated, which means you can't hire individuals to actually perform the work. So it's impossible to have the joint venture actually be the entity that is in fact having the security work go through it. It can't be done under SBA's rules. So that was inconsistent with the joint venture rules itself. So we pushed back with that and tried to make it clearer that a joint venture may be awarded a contract requiring a facility clearance, where either the joint venture itself, if I guess they could still get it, but I'm not sure how, or the individual partners to the JV that will perform the necessary work have the security clearances. And we made a distinction also that where a facility security clearance is required to perform the primary and vital requirements of the contract, the lead small business, whether it's the 8A, the WSB, etc., the lead small business partner must possess the required clearance. But where the security portion of the contract requiring a facility clearance is ancillary to the principal purpose, then your partner, your large business mentor, your other small business joint venture partner can have the clearance and do the work there. We think that makes sense.
Who makes that determination as to whether it's ancillary or the principal purpose? Is that the agency?
I think if the agency is allowing that, that should be fine. I mean, just as a the downer side of this is we didn't hear any negative comments from any agencies in the interagency comment process on this, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they're all in agreement. Somewhere will say, I don't care what SBA says,
Right.
we're doing it our way. So at least if you have our reg, and if I'd be taking it to JO and our reg versus nothing, our reg should win. But you never know what agencies will say and try to push back against us on us on. But at least we have it in our reg now.
It is hard to get those clearances for the joint venture, particularly if they're required prior to submission of a proposal. if they're required. Afterward, what we have been able to do is put the FSO in at least on a part-time basis, because that's not direct labor, so it doesn't violate SBA's rules. So if your facilities officer is an employee of the joint venture, it doesn't have to be full-time, and we have had clearances awarded on that basis.
Right. So that's the other thing we added in this provision as well, to make it clear. But that was always our position. But we made clear that the joint venture is always allowed to hire administrative personnel, and the FSO can be that administrative personnel as well. Okay, that's all I have on joint ventures that I was going to talk about, unless you want to talk about something else.
What's on the next page, Peter? Well, here's my question. Yeah. So this is a great rule because it helps the firms stay small longer. If you're in a joint venture and it's a $10 million contract and you're performing $4 or $5 million of that work, that's what you count toward your size standards if it's a revenue-based size standard. And then if it's employee-based, you don't duplicate any employees, but you count your percentage. Well, John, I'm going to mess this up. But
so you know, just like, remember, if it's a prime sub, unfortunately the prime is attributed 100% of revenues. So even if you subcontract out 40%, 100% goes to you. So in a joint venture context, if the joint venture is doing 100% of the work, then it's clear that, you know, the split is whatever the split of the work is. 40-60, 40 with the small, 60 with the large, that's fine. But if the joint venture is doing 50% of the work and the other 50 is being subcontracted out to other firms, even though the 8A or small firm is doing 40 of the 50 or 20% of the total, it doesn't get 20% of revenues, it gets 40% of revenues, because the joint venture is, we look at that as the prime, and we split the entire contract based upon the performance of the joint venture, if that makes sense.
well, this, you know, I don't think this is written anywhere, and we get lots of questions on it. So basically the guidance is that if there are lower tiered subs below the joint venture partners, then you can't take 40% of the revenues. You have to take 40% of the total contract revenues.
That's correct.
So, okay, so even if you did 40% of the work, you don't take like 40% of the work that you performed and then 51% of the lower tiered subs, because that was another way.
Nope. So yeah, again, it's split up based upon your percentage of the joint venture. If you're doing 40% of the joint venture, then you account 40% of the entire contract.
But if you're doing, let's say the joint venture itself is doing $5 million of a $10 million contract and the other 5 is subbed, then you have to count
40 of that other. That's
40
correct.
of that other.
Yep.
So you count 40%.
Right.
Of the whole contract if you have a lower tiered sub. I got it.
Yeah, I mean, it's just like in the prime sub, you would have counted 100% to you. Now you're only counting 40% because you're 40% of the joint venture.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
Anything else on that? I think that's all I needed on that.
Yeah, I think this last one is just a clarification that you use the same limitation on subcontracting rules that you do in a prime sub to determine the work share split inside the joint venture.
Right. So
okay.
to get to your 40%, you use the same calculation. So if it's a service contract, you exclude your supplies before you calculate what you need to get to 40%. Okay. Yep. Anything else on joint ventures, Peter?
Okay, the next thing I have is
any other questions.
Max. Do you have next on your list?
The small business.
Can I talk about the Max first? Where's that at, Peter?
Yep.
I think it's in a bit. We'll just go back and forward.
Page 2021. 21.
Okay. Okay. So this has been ongoing for a while. Is a concern of mine, and we try to make it into proposed and into final, make it more clear. So the problem here is, in my mind, if there's an unrestricted multiple award contract, your size and your status are irrelevant to the award of that contract. You're getting the award regardless. You're just certifying to something, but nobody's caring to what you're certifying for. You're a small business, or you're 8A, or you're a WSB, and you're certifying to that, but it really is irrelevant to the award of the unrestricted multiple award contract. A year later, 2 years later, 3 years later, when the agency wants to do a set aside for small businesses, for a set aside for 8A, a set aside for hub zone, etc., that's the first time in my mind that size and/or status is important. Until then, you are not being denied an award because of your status. This is the first time you're being denied an award if you are not, in fact, an eligible small business or an eligible 8A hub zone, etc. So we believe that that's the point where status and size must be determined. And the rule now goes forward, says for an unrestricted multiple award contract, you must be small for a set aside. That's set aside for small business set aside for an order at the time you submit your offer for the order. Similarly, if there's an order that's going to be set aside for 8A, you must be small and 8A at the time of your offer for the order. It just makes sense to us that really is the point in time that eligibility should be determined, because nowhere else was it necessary to, or it didn't exclude anyone else before that time. This is the first time exclusions will happen because of eligibility. It doesn't make sense in our mind to relate that back to the award of the original contract, because the award of the original contract, nobody was caring about your size and status. No one protested back then. See, under the current rule before this, if you relate it back, you must have protested at the time of the award of the original contract. And no one's doing that because no one's caring about that. It's only at the time of the order, several times later, months later, years later, where someone's being awarded an order that you now want to protest, but you'll be found to be untimely because you didn't protest at the time of the order, the award of the underlying contract. That all just didn't make sense to us. So we changed that in this rule. So again, for a multiple award contract that is unrestricted, if you're going to set aside an order, you must be eligible at the time of the order. If the underlying multiple award contract itself is reserved, either for set aside, either for small businesses or for 8A hub zone, etc., then whatever that was reserved for up front will flow down. So if it was an 8A multiple award contract, then you don't need to reestablish your 8A or your small status at the time of an order. If it was a small business set aside contract, and then a year later you want to do an order that's hub zone or WSB or 8A, your size flows down from the original contract, but your status as a WSB, as an 8A firm, or as a hub zone firm does not, since that wasn't critical to your awarding the contract up front. So in that context, you still have to certify that you are in fact a hub zone or a WSB 8A firm at the time of the order, but your size, if you've grown to be other than small, would still flow down unless, of course, if the contracting officer requested new certifications of size with respect to the order. The contracting officer always has that discretion. They don't use it very often, but they have that discretion and can use it at any point in time if they want to. And what else do I want to say about that? Oh, the other thing we added in between the proposed and the final rule is we're seeing more and more these days multiple award contracts that have reserves or pools. So if there was a reserve or a pool for small business or hub zone or 8A, et cetera, up front, and you submit an offer for that pool and are awarded a contract, then your size and status will flow down from that pool since eligibility counted up front to get onto that pool. So that was the big difference between the proposed and the final rule. And again, in both the proposed and final, it applies to all unrestricted contracts except for the GSA schedule.
So this rule does not apply to GSA schedules. We're getting lots of questions about that.
It does not. It does not apply to GSA schedule, no.
Okay. And in answer to another question, if the MAC is set aside, then it doesn't apply to that MAC. But if it's set aside for smalls, but yet they say we reserve the right to just go to 8As who have received the award, that, or WSBs or whatever, then at that point, if they decided to do a restricted task order award, if eligibility hadn't been determined except for size, then it could be determined as to status at the time of that task order, right?
Correct.
Okay. Next slide.
Do we want to go back to some of the? Do you want to go back to some of the small business rules?
Sure.
Is there another one on these, Max? No?
That's all I had for Max.
No, that's the only one.
Okay.
John, I have a question about this one, determining small business status as of the date of final proposal revisions and determining compliance with the joint venture agreement at the time of final proposal revisions, as opposed to when you submit your initial offer, including price. What happens if there aren't proposal revisions? And if there are, does that allow the parties to amend their joint venture agreement after the bid goes in?
I don't remember this provision now, right this second. What is this? Which one is this, Peter? Because it's not what I talk about often.
So it says that size eligibility is obviously the general rule is it's determined when your initial proposal goes in, including price. But
Correct.
if the non-manufacturer rule comes into play, or the ostensible subcontracting rule,
Right.
or SBA joint venture agreements is what this rule says, then you're going to look at the size at the time of final proposal.
There's two things going on there. We're never going to change the size. You're whether you have the receipts or the employees always is the date of offer. It's whether you're in compliance with the non-manufacturer, the ostensible subcontractor rule, or joint venture agreements can change up to date of award. But whether you have the employees and the receipts is always going to be the date of initial offer. So we're just allowing. So after the proposal is changed because of back and forth with the negotiations, that's when we're going to determine whether the non-manufacturer rule is met. That's when we're going to determine whether the ostensible subcontractor rule is met, and also whether or not your joint venture is in compliance with the rules. But that has nothing to do with whether or not you're small, as in terms of employees or receipts as of the date of the offer. So yes, it seems to say one thing, but it's not really saying that we're not going to change the date of receipt of offer to the date of award in terms of your number of employees or receipts. That's just for compliance with those three things.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. So if a proposal spans over 2 years and you were small when you submitted, and then after January you weren't small, you don't get penalized for that.
That's correct.
Okay.
And sometimes the non-manufacturer rule may not have been met up front, but you've in joint negotiations you understand that, and you submit a new subcontractor who's going to do something else. That's fine, but it has nothing to do with whether or not you had the necessary number of employees up front.
So you can change things after your initial proposal that might take you out of compliance, but you also have an opportunity to change things that put you into compliance.
Yes. Okay. Now, the thing I want to talk about is the identity of interest rule. So we have a rule that says the SBA may presume an identity of interest and thus affiliate one firm with another based upon economic dependence if the concern in question derives 70% or more of its receipts from another concern over the previous 3 fiscal years. I always believe this was I'm sorry?
It's always been one of my least favorite rules.
I always believe this is a little bit harsh. I mean, if you're a small business living in a small town and there's one large business is there, and if you want to get more revenues, your choice is to do business with them or to go make it inconvenient for yourself and do business elsewhere. So in my mind, if you're choosing to do business with that person, there's no reason to say that they control you. You're deciding to do business with them. So I don't believe that you should be deemed to be affiliated with them just merely because you've chosen to do business with them. So this rule recognizes that and says that the presumption may be rebutted. First by the one we currently have, that, for instance, that that you're not dependent on. And why you're not dependent? First is you've only been in business for a short time. Obviously, the first contract you make, you're 100% of your sales go to one person. It would be so silly for SBA to ever say that you're unduly reliant on that one firm because you have your only contracts with them. But that just makes no sense. So obviously, we always had the beginning rule about not being in business for a short time, but we added, this is the important part, where the contractual relationships do not restrict the concern in question from selling the same type of products or services to another purchaser. So in other words, what that means is you're choosing to do work with firm X. And in my example, you're choosing to do work with the big guy in your town. You could do one, 4 miles away to somebody else, but that's inconvenient for you. It'll cost you some transportation costs and it will lower your profits. So you're choosing not to do it with them. You're choosing to do it with the one in town where you can make more money yourself. That's your choice. That's not the large business's choice. And I believe that should not be held against you in terms of affiliation.
So I think this is really going to help on this rule. And I think the key message to the audience is to make sure that either intentionally or inadvertently in your subcontracts, you don't have anything in there that restricts, you from selling the same types of products or services to another purchaser. Now, John, there are certain non-competition provisions that we put into, teaming agreements and confidentiality, non-compete agreements that simply say, well, you won't go after this procurement with anybody else during the pendency. You're not talking about that. You're talking about, Microsoft saying you can't sell anybody else's products except for mine.
Right, like you're a chicken producer and you must sell to Purdue only. Yeah. Well, that's a problem. I mean, if you would sell to anybody you want to, but you choose to do Purdue, that's okay.
Okay, Peter, any questions on this?
No, I think that's helpful. So just to quickly clarify, so there's really, you're going to look at the contract itself to see if there's a non-compete, but assuming there's none or it's silent on the issue, you can take things into consideration outside of the agreement, maybe the location of the next chicken selling company, whatever you mentioned.
Right, exactly.
Okay.
So now, recertification of side status, we added some clarifications about this as well. So if there's a merger, sale, or acquisition occurs after offer and prior to award, the proposed rule said, the one thing we clarified in the final rule.
Wait, John.
I'm sorry.
Wait till okay, Peter, you got to keep track of the ones we're skipping. Is this the right one? John's doing his own thing here, but that's perfectly fine. Peter can handle it. Go ahead, John.
So if the merger or sale or acquisition occurs within 180 days of the date of the offer, the concern will be ineligible for award. If it occurs after 180 days, award can be made, but will not count as an award to small business. And the reasoning here is we don't want to disrupt normal businesses. Obviously, what happens, 18 months, 2 years from now, in between the offer and award, we don't want to hold that up. But on the other side of it, though, within 180 days of the offer, SBA believes that there's a very good likelihood that this was ongoing at the time of your offer. It didn't just happen in 2 days. It was something that was thought about and probably started prior to the offer. And if that's the case, you shouldn't be awarded that contract. We don't want firms to hold off on consummation of the deal till after an offer and then say, oh, I was small at the time of my offer. Sorry, SBA. Sorry, agency. Yeah, I'm bought out by huge company X, and I'm going to be performing this as a small business the entire time. It just makes us look bad, and our IG has been banging on us for years for allowing contracts to go to firms that are other than small. So this is just something in response to the IG's concerns, I think.
So obviously, I don't like this. I think the 180 days was a compromise maybe that was added between the proposal and the final rule.
It was.
So it's helpful a bit, but You know, SBA does have a rule that covers this situation in the identity of interest rules, where it says that you might be affiliated with somebody based upon a letter of intent that shows that you have the deal almost negotiated. And I will tell you, my corporate people go nuts, but there's a lot of times when deals are pushed through start to finish in 3 months, 4 months, 5 months. It's not out of the question. So this is a little bit better than the proposed rule.
Just delay another 2 months and you'll be fine.
So what?
Just delay it another 2 months and you'll be fine. Just don't do it in 180 days, in other words. Okay.
So you're saying, though, that a work can be made.
So I'm going to get to my 8A changes.
Okay, go.
Okay. Peter, go to 8A.
I'm going.
Okay. First thing we do is, for the first time, we define follow-on contract. So as you know, follow-on contract is important in 3 instances. It's important for whether we release something out of the program. It's important for bringing something in if there's an adverse impact on a follow-on requirement, and it's important in the tribal instance or tribal ANC NHO instance that a follow-on sole source can't be awarded to a sister company. That's when the follow-on is important. So we've had sometimes there's not clear about whether something is or is not a follow-on contract, and this tried to provide some guidance in that. We're going to look at 3 things: the scope, the magnitude, and the end user. In terms of the end user, this is a pretty easy one. In terms of, we've had a situation where, I'm giving an example, the Department of the Navy wants to buy X, it has an 8A contract to do it. The recompete comes up, and what's happening? DLA is buying X for the Department of the Navy, and they're claiming to us it's a new requirement. We don't need to go through a release process. We think that's baloney. It's the same end user of the same exact item. That's a follow-on contract, regardless of whether or not the procuring activity is in between is different. The end user is the same. We're going to call that a follow-on contract. Now, in terms of the magnitude, we've always had that 25% rule. It may have been conceived to be a hard and fast rule. I think that's inappropriate as well. This rule makes clear that 25% is a guide, but not necessarily hard and fast rule. And the reason we say that is because, specifically in the release context, we don't want the 25% to be used against SBA. If you have 2 8A requirements, $1 million each, and a procuring agency wants to combine the 2 of them into a $2 million contract and take it out of the program, we don't want them to be able to say, this is a new requirement because it's now 25% greater than either of those 2 contracts individually. SBA would say, in that situation, you needed SBA's approval to take it out of the 8A program, each one individually. Of course, you're going to need SBA's approval to take out the combined one out of the program as well. So that 25% is nice to look at, but it's not going to be a hard and fast rule if we think you're really trying to game us and get around the system. The important thing here is that anytime something is currently being performed through the 8A program and the procuring agency wants to take that little portion out and put it somewhere else, into a category management vehicle, into another vehicle, whatever the case may be, they must notify SBA that they're doing that. Now, the problem in the past is we oftentimes didn't find out about these things until way late in the process. Solicitation went out, they're just getting ready for award, and someone complains to SBA, this was used to be 8A and they took this out. Well, at that point in time, there's nothing for us to do. We can't really stop it at that point in time. So the procuring agency is now going to be required to tell us that something's going out. Yes, it's still their call as to determine whether or not this is a new requirement based upon all the other things that are being combined with, but at least we know it's there and can at least have a dialogue back and forth with them, pushing back on whether we think that's appropriate or not.
And even if it stays in the 8A program, maybe you said this, but that if they're taking an 8A contract from a vendor and they're moving it, say, to 8A stars, and that vendor doesn't have 8A stars, that even if it stays in the 8A program, that company still can't play. So they should come to you and say this is a problem, right?
Yeah, I was going to talk about it later, but that's also what we said. I thought I'll do it right now as well, even though it's just later on in the regs.
I'm sorry.
The release, we clarified two things on release. The first thing is in the situation where an agency wants to take something out of the 8A program, put it into an unrestricted multiple award contract, and then tell us what we're going to do an order to an 8A firm. Therefore, we don't need to release because 8A is going to get it eventually. Well, no, we disagree with that. The vehicle there is a non-8A vehicle. That's precisely what the rule was meant to prohibit, going from 8A vehicle to a non-8A vehicle. So that's the first part of that. The second one that Pam just mentioned is going from 8A. You have a firm who's done a great job. It's been in a program, for 5 years. It had a 3-year contract. It's now coming up for recompete. It's done, and the procuring agency is happy with them, but then they're being told they must move it to an 8A only vehicle, like Stars 2 or Stars 3. And this firm is not a contract holder of that vehicle. SBA needs to be involved in that because, again, the 8A program is a business development program. If that contract is critical to the firm's development overall, SBA may not accept it as a Stars 2 type of deal, or they need us to concur with that process. We don't believe that the firm should be hurt by that situation. They at least have the opportunity to compete for it in the follow-on, and that may be the case. Well, we would try to encourage that as much as possible, at least.
Thank you.
Okay. So immediate family member.
Anything else in the 8A? Okay, I'm going to it.
Immediate family. Now this is right. I think this also is one of those things that was just overly restrictive. Currently it says, well, someone wants to apply to the 8A program, and there's currently an immediate family member in the program, or formerly an immediate family member who has been in the 8A program, and the reg would say that an applicant firm must demonstrate that there's no connection between the applicant and the other current or former participant. No connection. Gosh, that just seems so harsh to me. For instance, if I'm a general contractor and my brother is a specialty trade contractor, why can't I hire him to do a job? And it doesn't make sense. If I'm going to hire anybody to do it for X dollars, why can't I hire him to do it for the exact same price? Relationships for contracts and subcontractors are based upon trust. If I trust him, why is he any different than anybody else, a subcontractor that I would otherwise hire? So I think that it didn't make sense to say that there can be no connections at all. That just didn't make sense. So we're going to say going forward that the firm would not be eligible if the concerns are connected by common ownership or common management, regardless of the amount. If the concerns have contractual relationships that are not conducted at arm's length, or if they have shared facilities. So as long as you don't have common management ownership, as long as you don't operate at the same facilities, and as long as your contracts between your family members are in fact arm's length transactions, you should be fine going forward. And the only change we made to this, I'm sorry, Pam.
No, I think this is a very good move. I think that people will appreciate this. It was overly restrictive on the firms to have to prove that there was no connection.
Now, in terms of experience, normally we say the applicant firm, the individual controlling, must demonstrate that he or she has the management experience of the complexity needed to run the business. In this context, if the firm is applying in the same primary NAICS code as a former family member or a current participant, then we're saying that you must actually have it in that exact code, and not just of the same complexity. Because we want to make sure that this business itself, and that your family member isn't indirectly going to be controlling this company somehow. And the other thing we clarified here is that work that you did for your family member's other firm, like it was your father's firm and you worked there for 15 years and now you're starting your own somewhere else, that work counts towards your expertise and doesn't count negatively against you. Sometimes people said it shouldn't count, but I disagree with that. Okay, changes of ownership.
Yeah.
So, I mean, in the ANC tribe context, I mean, I guess you have that separate section, but if all you're doing is merely adding or subtracting the holding on subsidiary in between the 8A firm and the tribe or ANC, we're not going to require you to do a change of ownership request and wait for that to happen, especially in those contexts, the ANC and tribes. People are coming in and out of, so that's the management side, I'm sorry. But you're going to be owned and controlled by the same overall entity at the end, the ANC or the tribe. So the mere fact that you add or subtract a wholly owned holding company should be irrelevant to that process. Just tell SBA after the fact, and that's no problem. In terms of other ones, so we eliminate the requirement that all changes of ownership affecting the disadvantaged individual must receive SBA prior approval. Currently we have a reg that says if it's a 10% change, 10% or more before or after the change of ownership, you don't need to tell us about it right away. You tell us after the fact. We're changing it to 20%. So where all non-disadvantaged individual owners involved in a change of ownership own no more than 20% in the concern both before and after the transaction, we will not require you to have a change of ownership process going through. You can do it and then tell us about it and notify us after the fact. Similarly, where the SBA approval is not needed, where the disadvantaged individual or entity is in control of the participant, will increase. So if we approved you 5149 and the 51% owner is now going to be buying out the other person, it makes no sense to require a change of ownership process. We've determined that person owns and controls it before. If they're increasing their percentage, they're going to control it after the fact. There should be no problem. Go do that and then let us know after the fact.
So John, on that issue, what happens if the transaction involving the minority owner somehow impacts the qualifying owner's interest in the company such that it gets reduced, meaning the minority owner buys an additional 5% of stock from the company, which has the effect of diluting the minority owner, let's say not below 51%, but below 75%. Do we still, since the minority owner has less than a 20% interest both before and after, is SBA approval still not required?
Well, that's what it says exactly. So as long as the minority person is less than 20 before and after, we would not require ownership, change of ownership process to go forward and have SBA approve it up front. In a situation where there may be some funky supermajority requirements, then that may cause you to be required to change those requirements as well. But we wouldn't find that out until after you notify us and let us know at that point in time.
Okay.
So much to talk about, and I don't know where to go sometimes because there's what else you want to talk about in 8A? Anything specifically that hits you?
Definitely the business activity targets. I think this is a great change.
Okay, we're not there yet. I'll get to that one in a second. I'm thinking like some of the.
Why'd you ask me if you were going to do what you wanted to do?
No, I'm trying to figure out. I mean, this is all. I'm thinking about all these things are tribal things. Business activity targets. Okay, business activity targets. Now, let's see. Now we received some comments on this. Pam, you submitted some comments on this issue for sure. I'm positive you did.
I did, and I love this. It's much better.
So we currently have business activity targets that say SBA should, firms must have certain percentages of non-8A work going forward in out years in order to get sole source contracts. And there was a problem with if you didn't have those percentages, we had strict rules regarding prohibitions on sole source. This makes it a lot easier to continue to get sole source. Instead of having a strict prohibition, a firm can demonstrate that it's making good faith efforts, sort of similar to what we have in the change of our primary NAICS code issue. That you've trying to get work in that area, so far you've just been unsuccessful. But you can't just make claims that you've done work, that you've submitted offers. You have to demonstrate clearly how you have in fact offered on contract X, contract Y. Let us know what's going on so we can say, yes, you're trying to get those, and maybe you don't need the strict, you just been unlucky. Sometimes that happens. You want to say anything about this, Pam?
Just that you also made some changes to the percentages of non-8A work required in years 3, 4, and 5 of the transition. So this is a little bit less stringent on this front as well.
Right. We reduced those numbers a little bit in the beginning years just to have them in an easier time of transitioning from one way of doing it to another way of doing it. We didn't think it was appropriate to immediately try to get them to jump to bigger numbers. I think Congress also in the conference report to the statute years ago had these numbers in mind. So we're going with those numbers going forward.
John, I have a question. We have a number of clients that are going through the annual review process right now, which is obviously before November 16th. Are the district offices going to be giving consideration to this rule as they review the company for non-8A back compliance, or is it going to be strictly applied only after November 16th?
I'm thinking only after November 16th. Yeah.
They should request an extension to submit their annual review package, maybe.
Right.
There you go.
Yeah. So some other things that we changed, right now we have a rule that says a newly admitted participant to the program can't get a contract until SBA approves its business plan. Unfortunately, some firms through the years have told us that they've lost contract opportunities awaiting SBA's concurrence on their business plan. So the rule has changed to say you can get a contract immediately. Sometimes people are self-marketing themselves saying, my approval with SBA certification is going to be coming shortly. I can do this work, and the contract's coming out simultaneously. And the agency doesn't mind holding it up for a little bit, but they don't want to wait another 3 or 4 months after SBA in order for SBA to approve it. So sometimes they've lost contract opportunities. So this allows them to go get a contract immediately. As long as they submit their business plan within 60 days down the road, there should be no problems there. So we refined eligibility for 8A awards. We make it clear that for the sole source context, you must be eligible as date of award. That's always been our case. It may not have been as clear as it could have been in the rule before. And for competitives, the rule has always been by statute that you're eligible for a competitive 8A award, provided you are eligible on the date set forth for the receipt of offers in the solicitation. Now, we've had questions about two-step process, like design build types of deal. You have to be eligible on the first date or the second date. This makes clear that you have to be eligible on the first date, and that's all we need to know in that context. That should make it easier for everyone to know what the rules are and easier to comply with them as well. The bona fide place of business. This also is a big change. Yeah, currently I'm sorry, Pam?
Bona fide place of business.
Yes.
Peter, you're going the wrong way.
So the Small Business Act says that to the maximum extent practicable, small 8A construction contracts shall be awarded within the geographical region where the contract's going to be performed. So we historically have implemented that by requiring a bona fide place of business within the district office area of the firm. Unfortunately, this sometimes proved inequitable. I think, like the example we give in the proposed rule, the final rule, we say that if you're doing a contract in Philadelphia, right across the river in New Jersey is ineligible since they're being serviced by a different district office, whereas the opposite side of the state, outside of Pittsburgh, you're eligible for the contract. That doesn't make sense. So, we make changes regarding two things. First, we recognize metropolitan statistical areas. So in the Philadelphia example, someone in New Jersey, Delaware, Maryland, Pennsylvania are all in the same area and could easily submit an offer and perform that contract, and we recognize those as applicable for that particular contract. Similarly, in more wide open states, we're talking about contiguous counties. So again, you know, some of those states are very, very large. Currently, if you're on one side of Montana versus the other, you're eligible even though you're hundreds of miles away. Yet across the river, again, you're ineligible. That doesn't make sense. So we're going to allow it. The contiguous county, whether even if it's in a different state, is going to be eligible for that as well. And you don't have to establish a separate business across the state lines just because of SBA's old rule.
That's great, John. And our slide should say for our audience that this is with respect to construction contracts.
Correct. And the other part of it is we put in time frames, as Pam has noted on her slide here, for when SBA is supposed to be approving these requests for bona fide place of businesses. You know, if you submit a request timely and SBA has not responded to you timely, you are presumed to be okay as far as the offer is concerned. So you can go ahead and submit your offer and say, yes, I'm eligible. And then it's up to SBA to approve that prior to award. We still must approve it prior to award, but you will not be dinged because you submitted an offer without having it approved first.
Okay. Can we go real quick to page 20? Sorry. 27, Peter. The you changed the 8A application process a bit.
Oh, I missed that one. That was a big one. Sorry. Too many things. So the 8A application process, right now, when you're denied the ultimate decision, whether it's through the AA BD and you don't seek reconsideration or you don't seek appeal, you must wait a year from that determination. If you seek reconsideration, it's a year from the reconsideration determination. And if you go to OHA and you've ultimately found ineligible again, then it's a year from that date. So what we have is we said, you know what, we're trying to make this consistent with the other programs, HubZone and now WSB. So we were saying you can, if you declined, you can reapply within 90 days of the decision. But we've also eliminated the reconsideration process in this rule as well. So for a firm who's denied in October of 2020, they must wait a full year until October 2021 in order to apply against their program. However, the reconsideration process is still available to them. Whereas a firm that's denied in December of 2020, they only must wait till March 2021. So it seems like a disconnect, but that's just the way it's going to work out for that first year. And after the first year, it'll be, everyone will be the same in terms of waiting the same amount of time. That's just the way, unfortunately, that's just the way it's going to be initially. In terms of voluntary withdrawals or early graduations, we moved that from the headquarters back to the field. So if someone wants to get out of the program, gosh, let's make it easier for them to get out of the program. This doesn't make sense for SBA to require them to wait around for headquarters to say yes. It just doesn't make sense, especially in the entity-owned context. You're a tribal or ANC-owned firm, and you want to establish a new firm in the same NAICS code. So you want to get this one out and bring a new one in, and you have to wait 5 or 6 months for SBA to approve that. It just doesn't make sense to have you added on that time when you could have gotten out of the program months earlier if the district office only was involved.
Hey, John, I think this is an interesting question. It may not apply to a lot of people, but it's on the bona fide place of business. And the question is, will COVID quarantine and stay-at-home orders impact bona fide offices requirement?
I think, well, I mean, if you had an office up front, and right now no one's going to it because of this, I'm sure that there's no problem with that. If you never had an office there, I'm not sure what we said about that. I'll think about that and get back to you on that one.
Okay. Do you want to talk about the tribal? There's some stuff that we haven't hit yet.
There's one on excessive withdrawals. Like for instance, let's say the tribal A and C, they own it 5149, and they want to give back to the community. But when in doing so, they must give they give more than the excessive withdrawal amount to the non-disadvantaged owner. Normally, when you make distributions, you must do it on a pro rata basis. So if you're giving, $2 per share to the 51%, you should give $2 per share to the 49% as well. So if that number happens to go above the excessive withdrawal number, we're not going to call it an excessive withdrawal. We're going to allow that to happen because we want to have distributions go back to the native communities and make sure they're okay. So I think that's a helpful clarification there.
Yep. And the last bullet too, where A and C owned businesses that are treated as small are not required to submit subcontracting plans.
That's true. I forgot to put that in there.
Yep. So there was one or two slides that we skipped. By the way, everybody needs to know we're going to post these slides, or Frederick's going to do whatever he does, his magic, and Frederick's our man behind the scenes. So thank you, Frederick, for setting this up and for helping us through this today. But so you'll have these slides, and they'll be in the order that we put them up. But page 15, you don't need to go to this necessarily, Peter, but SBA is putting in these regulations that for small business set-asides or any set-asides that the agency should count the experience and past performance of the first-tier subcontractors as if it were the small business, or as well as the small business prime contractors. So hopefully this guidance to the agencies will be listened to, and the small businesses will be able to use their subcontractors' past performance in a more meaningful way than they have in the past.
What's funny about that is that in the interagency comment period, certain agencies were saying we should copy only the wording of the statute, because the statute mandated it for bundled contracts and contracts for certain dollar thresholds. We wanted to apply it to all contracts, and they were saying we should only say capabilities, not capabilities, past performance and experience. And I always said, you know what? Let's make it as broad as possible, because certain agencies are telling us that past performance and experience are sometimes different than capabilities. So whatever word they're using, we want to make sure it's included. So we put all three in there, and finally they end up giving it to us.
Good. And then another one, and again, it's page 18, but it says that under recertification that a required recertification changes a firm's status for future orders and options. So let's say that a firm is acquired and they can't recertify as small after the acquisition. And so there were two schools on this. The first being that they could still get a future task order, but the agency couldn't get small business credit. And then the other was, well, since they already recertified that they weren't small, they couldn't submit any additional task orders under that vehicle. So do you know, what do you think the right answer is?
And it says what? What did we say? So
changes firm status. So are we saying that the agency can't take credit on future?
That's what I think we're saying. It depends, except for the 8A, in the 8A context. If it's non-8A, you can be awarded it, but you can't take credit for it. In the 8A context, you're no longer 8A, you won't be able to get the award order at all. Because in that context, somehow they'll be telling us that it's not 8A, therefore we don't have to go through release next time we do it. We didn't want to get in that murky situation. So in the 8A context, if it's an 8A contract and you have to recertify and you're no longer able to do so, then you won't be able to get any more. But everywhere else you can get it, just won't count as the awards of that type.
So if I have, and I don't know if this is the right example, but let's say I have a NASA soup contract and I have lot 15, which is a small business set aside, and I am acquired and I tell the contracting agency that I'm no longer small. I can still submit for future orders on soup, and unless the agency asks for a recertification on that task order, I just submit it, and I've already told them I'm not small, so they just can't take small business credit for it. That's the right scenario, correct?
Going forward, you can get the award. They just can't take credit for it. That's correct.
Okay.
And the last thing I want to talk about before we leave is the thing we did on substitution. I think this is important. You know, whether you must go through the T4C waiver process or not. So currently, SBA's regs authorize SBA to substitute one 8A firm for another, where the first firm would otherwise be terminated for default, but for the substitution. You know, that was the only exception we had. If that wasn't the case, and you're trying to go to even to another 8A firm, you had to go through the waiver process to get there. So we've broadened that to say, yes, we have the termination of a default one, but we've added other things as well. So SBA may authorize another participant to complete performance of an 8A contract where the procuring activity contracting officer demonstrates to SBA that the participant was awarded, that who was awarded the 8A contract is unable to complete it. What does that mean exactly? I'm not sure, but it's broader than termination of default. But the key one really in my mind is the third one, where SBA determines that substitution would serve the business development needs of both 8A participants. So if both firms, the one who used to be performing the contract and the one who will be performing the contract, demonstrate to SBA that this is positive towards their overall business development, we will allow their change outside of the T4C process. And I think that's important as well. Okay.
I think it's important as well too. I mean, it takes so long to get the waiver requests through, and sometimes they just aren't acted on. So if it's two companies in the 8A program, then this will make it easier to be able to transfer a contract. I'm curious, John, why the transferring firm has to still be in the program if it's an 8A contract of a graduate going to a former 8A company. Maybe when you do technical corrections, you can fix that, huh?
Did we say that specifically?
From one 8A to another.
Okay, I can say that is it. We meant to say the 8A firm, well, the one who was awarded the contract to another. Well, I can work on that in the interpretations.
That'd be great. Peter,
so that's the down and dirty. There's lots more. I mean, as Pam said, this rule is really in depth, and you really should go through it in detail and look for it, and look through it. If you have questions, certainly give either of us an email, and we can get back to you on more detailed responses.
And John, I don't want to be saying anything to embarrass you, but I can really see your hand through these because they're fair. They really have made beneficial changes. There's only a couple that I don't like, and you know which ones they are, but I think that this is going to overall benefit the community, and it streamlines it, and it will make things more clear and easier. And just for our audience, every time somebody issues a regulation, you end up with fact patterns and scenarios that couldn't possibly have been anticipated. And sometimes with a rule this massive, there are things that could require tweaks. So SBA generally will put out a technical correction to fix some of those things. So if you see anything as you're going through, or you hear anything that just maybe SBA didn't think about, or maybe doesn't make sense for because it was just not in as, I don't know why, but just let us know, and we can certainly try to convey anything that we think, John needs to hear that might just have been something that could be corrected. Is that fair, John?
Sure.
So I'm looking at all the questions that we have. It seems like some of them have been answered since they were submitted, but there are a number that we didn't have time to get to. So we'll make note of those, and then either Pam, myself, or one of our firm's government contracting lawyers will reach out to you, because we want to make sure that everyone is getting the most out of this, and that questions to the extent that you had them get answered. But again, I want to thank John very much again for taking his time to spend it with us and explain this rule. And of course, Pam, thank you much. And thank you, everyone.
Yeah, thank you, John. And thanks to everyone who dialed in. I hope this was helpful.
Great. Take care, guys.
Bye.